Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good day to the examiners, Dr. Zaini, Binti, Zainal, Abidin, and Encik, Tunku, Nashril, Tunku, Abaidah. First of all, it's an honor to us today to deliver a presentation. We also want to take the opportunity to thank you for allowing us to present our final year project. But let me introduce myself first. My name is Adilla, Binti Mohammad Johari, and this is my partner.
I am Asnida Binti Mohamed Salleh.
The title of our research is The Influence of Performance, Effort Expectancy, Facilitating Condition, and Social towards Formation of Behavioral Intention to Use e-wallet among Malaysia Generation X during pandemic COVID-19.
In this presentation, we would like to give you an overview of our research. We will present Chapter 1, Introduction, Chapter 2, Literature Review, Chapter 3, Research and Methodology, Chapter 4, Findings, and Chapter 5, Discussion. So that will be our overview of our research, and now let's move on to the first point, Introduction. The outbreak of coronavirus in Malaysia since last March until today has unexpectedly changed the shift from cash to the digital payment. The COVID-19 pandemic has prompted Malaysian digital economy to flourish and for consumers to become more receptive toward digital mode of payment. According to Visa Country Manager for Malaysia, the health crisis and subsequent lockdown led to the boom in cashless payment within the span of only a few months, equivalent to 3 years worth in the growth. Oxford Language defined cashless as characterized by the exchange of fine and check, debit or credit card or electronic method rather than the use of cash. By going cashless, people can avoid handling physical cash completely and minimize human contact, so that total people are going to use the e-wallet also increase.
The government of Malaysia enforced a movement control order starting on March 18, 2020 to break the chain of COVID-19, which had a substantial impact on just how business was conducted during the shutdown. Over 37 small and medium-sized enterprises and some 200 sport-related companies have shut down their business following the COVID-19 pandemic and subsequent movement restriction. To stop the spread of coronavirus in the country, the Ministry of Health calls on all parties to take the initiative by conducting social distancing. Social distancing is a strategy to minimize social interaction and avoidance of physical touch between people. This will aid in reducing the number of new infections and slowing the spread of the virus. During the lockdown, most of the industry across the globe stopped operating. This situation had caused the encouragement among a customer to use digital cash transaction and payment method to avoid unnecessary physical visit and physical touch to transfer or remit the cash. Based on a study in the payment habits of Visa users, Visa Malaysia Country Manager Mohammad also said that 74% of Malaysians showed that they were moving towards cashless by using various forms of digital payment methods. To cope with the pandemic, consumers shifted their preferences to mobile and electronic wallets, such as e-wallets, rather than traditional payment methods, since e-wallets allow consumers to transfer money among various parties faster, free of charge, convenient, and flexible payment method. Based on Google E-Economy Southeast Asia 2020 report, e-wallet transaction increased to an average of 25% post-COVID-19. According to Blockchain's 2018, 61% of the people are using e-wallet in USA and 34% users are using e-wallet in Malaysia. In 2016, the e-wallet transaction is 594 billion and expected to reach $3.1 trillion by 2022 in Asia. This statistic proves that people are adapting to use digital payment, which gives them more convenience.
There is 6 research questions in this study. The first one is, what is the behavioral intention that intend respondent to use an e-wallet? Second, does performance expectancy influence behavioral intention of Malaysian Generation X to use e-wallet? Third, does effort expectancy influence the behavioral intention of Malaysian Generation X to use e-wallet? Fourth, does facilitating condition influence the behavioral intention of Malaysian Generation X to use e-wallet? Next, does social influence the behavioral intention of Malaysian Generation X to use e-wallet? Lastly, what does the dominant factor influence the behavioral intention of Malaysian Generation X to use e-wallet? We also have 6 research objectives. The first one is to identify the behavioral intention that intend responded to use an e-wallet. Second, identify relationship between the influence of performance expectancy and behavioral intention of Malaysian Generation X to use e-wallet. Third, identify the relationship between the influence of effort expectancy and the behavioral intention of Malaysian Generation X to use e-wallet. Fourth, identify the relationship between the influence of facilitating conditions and behavioral intention of Malaysian Generation X to use e-wallet. Next, identify relationship between influence of social and behavioral intention of Malaysian Generation X to use e-wallet. Last, to determine the dominant factor influence the behavioral intention of Malaysian Generation X to use e-wallet.
In this study, we used the UTALK model. The UTALK was developed by Vegetesh, Tong, and Siu in the year of 2003. According to Fu and Ahmad, the UTALK model was established based on the extension of the well-established Technology Acceptance Model, TAM. Bangladesh developed a comprehensive model called UTAL to comprehend IT acceptance and adoption. This UTAL model brings together a variety of IT acceptance models that integrate the elements of 8 well-known models, which is Theory of Reason Action, TRA, Technology Acceptance Model, TAM, Theory of Planned Behavior, TPB, Innovative Diffusion Theory, IPT, Model of PC Utilization, MPCU, Motivational Model MM, combined TAM and TPB, used to offer a hybrid model by joining the TAM and TPB tailor and thought, and Social Connective Theory. Through empirical investigation, Bangladesh 2003 identified 4 perspectives: performance expectancy, effort expectancy, social influence, and facilitating condition.
In this study, we have 4 hypotheses. The first hypothesis of our study is relationship between influence performance expectancy toward formation of behavioral intention to use e-wallet among Malaysian Generation X. Next, relationship between influence effort expectancy toward formation of behavioral intention to use e-wallet among Malaysian Generation X. Third, relationship between influence facilitating condition toward formation of behavioral intention to use e-wallet among Malaysian Generation X. And lastly, relationship between influence social toward formation of behavioral intention to use e-wallet among Malaysian Generation X.
Next, Chapter 3, which is known as methodology. This chapter discusses about research design, unit or level analysis, sample size, sampling technique, data collection, and overview of the questionnaire. Research design carries an important influence on the reliability of the results attained. In this chapter, the researcher uses the quantitative method to collect the data to study the influence of performance, effort expectancy, facilitating condition, and social towards formation of behavioral intention to use e-wallet during pandemic COVID-19. Second, unit or level of analysis. The unit analysis is the level of aggregation of the data collected during the subsequent data analysis stage. In this study, the unit of analysis is a focus on individual which is specific on the Generation X in Malaysia who are born between 1965 to 1918. Their age is between 42 to 57 years old. This research is conducted to understand what the factor is influenced, particularly Generation X, which are less to use this modern method of transaction payment like e-wallet. Sample size. Sample size determination is the technique of electing the number of observations to include in a sample. The sample size is an important feature of any study or investigation in which the aim is to make inferences about the population from a sample. The samples were selected by random sampling technique from the Generation X in Malaysia, which intend to use e-wallet. It is important to choose the appropriate respondent when collecting data and information necessary to obtain a result from a survey. In this study, the population of Generation X in Malaysia is estimated at 69635 million with a percentage of 21.32%, according to Department of Statistics Malaysia. Therefore, the sample is equivalent to only 385 respondents among the Generation X in Malaysia that calculate from Rosov calculator. Next, sampling technique. The sampling frame is the actual list of individuals that the sample will be drawn from. Ideally, it should include the entire target population. Non-probability sampling is also referred to as a random sampling. In this research, the proposed sampling technique being used is the non-probability technique. This is because researchers do not have a list of the people consist of Malaysian X generation who already use e-wallet. Thus, the most suitable sampling that can be used in this study is simple random sampling. Data collection can be collected in a variety of ways. The most common method is using survey. The survey can be done by a variety of methods. The method that will be used for the study is a Google form. The data from the study will be conducted an empirical study to test the construct that may influence the X behavioral intention in Malaysia to use e-wallet, considering the circumstances of COVID-19. For this purpose, we developed a questionnaire consisting of 5 constructs. Before sharing the questionnaire and sending it to the target group, we conducted a pilot study with 30 people. Overview of the questionnaire consists of 6 sections, which section A is demographic profile, section B is on the dependent variable, and C, D, E is on independent variable. Chapter 4, findings. First, to identify the behavioral intention that intended respondent to use an e-wallet. Table above demonstrates the result of the behavioral intention that intended respondent to use an e-wallet using the descriptive statistic, where the mean value for the behavioral intention is 4.6952 and categorized as high. Second, to identify a relationship between the influence of performance expectancy and behavioral intention of Malaysian Generation X to use e-wallet. Table shows that the relationship between the influence of performance expectancy and behavioral intention of the Pearson correlation was applied. The coefficient relation show that the R value is 0.757, which signifies a strong positive linear relationship between the influence of performance expectancy and the behavioral intention. The P value indicates the value of the 0.000, which is less than 0.05. Thus, One is accepted as there is a significant relationship between the influence of performance expectancy and behavioral intention of Malaysian Generation X to use an e-wallet. Next, table shows that the relationship between behavioral intention and the influence of effort expectancy after person correlation was applied. The coefficient ratio shows that the R value is 0.782, which signifies a strong positive linear relationship between behavioral intention and effort expectancy. The P value indicates that the value of 0.000, which is less than 0.05. Thus, it is accepted that there is a significant relationship between the behavioral intention of e-wallet use and the influence of effort expectancy. And then, table shows that the relationship between behavioral intention and the influence of facilitating condition after person correlation was applied. The coefficient relation shows that the R value is 0.0727, which signifies a strong positive linear relationship between behavioral intention and the influence of facilitating condition. The P value indicates the value of 0.00, which is less than 0.05. Thus, it is accepted that as there is a significant relationship between the behavioral intention of e-wallet use and the influence of the facilitating condition. Next, table shows that the relationship between behavioral intention and social influence after person correlation was applied. The coefficient relation shows that the R value is 0.379, which signifies a strong positive linear relationship between behavioral intention and the social influence. The P value indicates that the value of 0.000, which is less than 0.05. Thus, it is accepted that there is a significant relationship between behavioral intention of e-wallet use and the influence of social. Lastly, to determine the dominant factor influence the behavioral intention of Malaysian Generation X to use e-wallet, the result demonstrated the performance expectancy, effort expectancy, facilitating condition, and social influence towards the behavioral intention of use e-wallet among Generation X in Malaysia. Nonetheless, the result recorded performance expectancy as the main dominant factor to behavioral intention to use e-wallet among Generation X in Malaysia. Thus, performance expectancy is the main contributing factor that influencing the dependent variable.
This chapter is a discussion of finding in chapter 4. The finding is based on 385 respondents who range from 42 to 57 years old, which is Generation X in Malaysia. All the issues were examined using the method described by chapter 3, which describes descriptive statistic, correlation, and multiple regression. Meanwhile, the relationship between two variables which are independent variable and dependent variable were evaluated to see either they accepted or rejected. Therefore, researchers focused on the 6 research objectives and examined the consistency or inconsistency with the previous study to identify behavioral intention that intended respondent to use an e-wallet. In analyzing the first research objective, which is to identify the factors that contribute to the behavioral intention of use e-wallet for Generation X in Malaysia, the descriptive statistic is used in this research to deal with it, with the average mean for dependent variable of 14.0857, it can be concluded that the majority of the respondents have known about factors that influence the behavioral intention to use e-wallet among Generation X in Malaysia, and were agreeing with the factors being asked in the questioning. Overall, it can be said that the respondents will agree that they will agree the factor influence their behavioral intention to use e-wallet. The second research objective is to identify the relationship between the influence of performance expectancy and behavioral intention of Malaysian Generation X to use e-wallet. The findings showed that R value 0.757, which is significant, a strong positive relationship between influence of performance expectancy and behavioral intention. The P value also happened to be below than 0.05, which is 0.00. The findings indicate that performance expectancy is one of the factors driving Generation X increased use of e-wallet. Thus, it is accepted as there is a significant relationship between influence of performance expectancy and behavioral intention. Relationship between influence of effort expectancy and behavioral intention of Malaysian Generation X to use e-wallet. The findings show that the R value is 0.782, while the P value also happened to be below than 0.05, which is 0.00. The findings demonstrate that effort expectancy is one of the elements that influence Generation X use of e-wallet in Malaysia. Hence, it is accepted that there is a significant relationship between influence of performance expectancy and behavioral intention. Many past studies have explored the concept of effort expectation because consumers are easy to use and require less effort to adopt new technologies, for example, with the use of e-wallet. Any past study have explored the concept of effort expectation because consumers are easy to use and require less effort to adopt new technology. The fifth research objective is to identify the relationship between social influence and the behavioral intention of Malaysian Generation X to use e-wallet. The findings show that the R value is reliable. The findings indicate that social influence is the one of the factor driving Generation X increased use of e-wallet. Thus, it is accepted as there is as there is significant relationship between influence of social and behavioral intention. The past researcher also found that influence social have significant result. Davis believed that an individual intention to accept a new system depends on positive value of system, as well as the easy and effortlessness of using the system. In study of the acceptance of mobile network service, effort expectancy is proven to have material influence on behavioral intention. Most dominant factors, the researcher used the multiple regression method by looking the standard beta value for each of these factors. By using this method, the researcher have found that the value of standard beta for performance expectancy is more higher than the value of standard beta for effort expectancy, facilitating conditions, and social influence. However, this result doesn't mean that other factors does not influence the behavioral intention of e-wallet use. As I mentioned earlier, effort expectancy, facilitating condition, and social impact on factors that contribute to the behavioral intention of e-wallet use, but not strong as performance expectancy. An assumption that can be made is influence. The respondent will answer the questionnaire based on what they feel, whether it is related to them or not, and whether these factors will influence them to use e-wallet or not. Between those four factors, the respondent seems more familiar with performance expectancy rather than the other factors, since the performance expectancy is one of the factors that influence the behavioral intention to use e-wallet to Generation X in Malaysia. Other than that, performance expectancy is the most dominant factors for behavioral intention of e-wallet use because it is easier to decide on whether someone has intended and predicted to use e-wallet. The respondent might have answered question based on what they think at that time, and they might not detect that they are influenced by the other factors. This study contributes to the knowledge of investigating the factors that influence performance, effort expectancy, facilitating condition, and social toward formation of behavioral intention to use e-wallet among Malaysian Generation X during pandemic COVID-19. Unified Theory of Acceptance and Use of Technology, UTAUT, was used to explain the conceptual framework. As a result, the findings show that the factor influencing Malaysian Generation X to use e-wallet has significant impact on the behavioral intention to use e-wallet. It also provides the knowledge about the most dominant factors toward the behavioral intention to use e-wallet among Malaysian Generation X in Malaysia. It also shows the most influencing factors on the intention to use e-wallet among Malaysian Generation X is month expectancy.
Next, in this research, a few limitations have been identified during the process of conducting the study. This limitation caused the researcher time and prevented the study from being completed. The subsection following will go into more detail about this limitation and obstacles. The sample were collected only from the Generation X in Malaysia without including other groups such as the Generation Y, Generation Z, and Baby Boomers. In this study, the population of Generation X in Malaysia is estimated at 69635 million with a percentage of 25.32% according to the Department of Statistics Malaysia. Therefore, the sample is equivalent to only 385 respondents among Generation X in Malaysia. Second limitation is method of data collection. This research implements the survey method based on a questionnaire only without interviewing the respondents. It makes a different perception answer from respondents comparing the facts. In the process of data collection, the information provided through the questionnaire respondents sometimes do not show the actual opinion. Last limitation is lack of previous studies in the same field. Literature review is an important part of any research because it helps to identify the scope of works that have been done so far in the research area. The use of e-wallets is now getting better response from the Generation X, but there is still a lack of a locally previous study discussing it. The researcher's ability to use a reference for this research has been hampered by this issue. However, since the topic has received massive focus from outside the country, the researchers are still able to collect the references that need to complete the work.
The result of the study are For next, research suggests to distribute questionnaire in a longer period to know the accurate perception of the respondent. The recommendation is enlarge the scope of respondent. For the purpose of the future research, it can be recommended to expand the longitude of study where the later study is made to focus on Generation X in Malaysia with the intention of using e-wallet. Next recommendation, include more factors in the research. In era, technology is becoming more usable and the use of e-wallet will inevitably become a necessity in daily life. It simplifies payment, save time and avoid contact payment that are likely to pose a risk to health. By applying the study of more factors on the intention to use an e-wallet can show more specific dominant factors on the intention to use an e-wallet. Next, use qualitative research method. Qualitative research is a methodology designed to collect non-numerical data to gain insight. It is non-statistical and unstructured or semi-structured. It is based on the data gathered using a research design and answer the question.